Ah, Chicago. The summers are hotter than the surface of the sun, and the winters are so cold they're a violation of the Geneva Convention. But for 1 or 2 days in the fall, it's actually pretty tolerable. The thing is, if I was to step here, I'm no longer in Chicago. I've officially entered the domain of Morgan Stanley and the Emir of Abu Dhabi. That's right, in 2008, Chicago sold its streets to Morgan Stanley and a handful of investors for $1.157 billion. More specifically, they sold a 75-year lease on the city's 36,000 parking meters and their respective parking spaces. And until the year 2084, the people of Chicago will pay a private company anytime they want to park at a meter. That's right, 2084, which means the Bears might win the Super Bowl before Chicago is allowed to decide what it does with its own parking meters. It's okay, I can say that. I was born here.
Hello, can you turn over?
Yeah, Rollie.
Turn over?
And aside from Chicago undercharging Morgan Stanley and friends by billions of dollars, Chicago gave up something even more important: control of their streets. Anytime Chicago wants to have a parade or do road work or take a meter offline for any reason, the citizens of Chicago have to pay Morgan Stanley back for their supposedly lost revenue. In 2012 alone, the bill was $31.5 million, which, by the way, was more than Chicago was making from all 36,000 meters combined before they sold them to Morgan Stanley. And in a time when using our resources efficiently is so important and making our cities more human-centric is so popular, the people of Chicago have found themselves locked into a parking meter deal that will prioritize expensive, polluting, car-centric infrastructure for 3 generations. And to help me get a sense of exactly how badly the people of Chicago got boned in this deal, I'm going straight to the top with Matt Parker from the YouTube channel Stand Up Maps.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you for being here.
I've now embraced the Chicago life.
It looks great on you.
Thank you.
Now, Matt's one of the best science and math communicators I've ever met, so he's gonna help take us through the math part a little bit. We don't actually need you for like probably 5 minutes. I gotta do some context and then smash to an intro and that kind of thing. But you can read this line here.
This is a bad situation, but maybe there's something we can do about it.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Rollie Williams, a guy with a climate science and policy degree and a secret, shameful appreciation for ketchup on hot dogs. And this is a video about the time Chicago sold its streets to Morgan Stanley. Welcome to Climate Town. The year was 2008. Breaking Bad just came out.
Get off the toilet!
Michael Phelps just won 8 gold medals at the Beijing Olympics. And America was entranced by the meandering nonsense of Jason Mraz. It was a simpler time, but it was about to get hit by a financial crisis. Don't ask me which country started it. I don't know. Let me take you there through the art of voiceover. Last time on Chicago! With the recession looming, the Windy City needed to find some cash to plug a $150 million sized hole in their city budget. They could raise property taxes, but Democratic Mayor Richard M. Daley knew that wouldn't be a very popular idea with the voters. Instead, he opted for a novel solution. They'd sell off the city's 36,000 parking meters to the highest bidder. What was he thinking? And while we know it was a trash can of an idea in hindsight, at the time, it wasn't quite so obvious. See, Chicago had previously privatized things like janitorial services, tax collection, and parking garages in deals known as public-private partnerships, and the results had been vaguely positive. See, cities have limited resources and manpower, and sometimes outsourcing a job like street resurfacing to a private company that already has a steamroller and a truck full of yellow paint makes a lot more sense than the city of Chicago buying a bunch of new equipment and doing it themselves. So Chicago put their meters up for sale in the form of a 75-year lease. Morgan Stanley crunched some numbers and decided to offer the city $1,156,500,000. Now, $1 billion is very cool. And since the majority of Chicago's meters were still charging 25 to 50 cents an hour, they weren't exactly a money-making enterprise for the city. At the time of the deal, the entire fleet of 36,000 parking meters was making just $20 million a year for Chicago. Now, you mathletes out there might be saying, hey, isn't 20 million times 75 years $1.5 billion? Now, that is technically true, you dorks. But getting $1 billion up front would allow Chicago to fix their budget, Mayor Daley could score some political points by keeping property taxes low, and they could invest the rest in the market so they could save some of that cash for a rainy day. Talk about opening the door to a bright future. Oh! Morgan Stanley was willing to part with $1 billion up front by getting some co-signers on board, including the Emir of Abu Dhabi, and they plan to make their money back by just jacking up the meter prices. Plus one or two tiny little details in the contract that I'm sure won't come up in this episode about how Chicago got totally screwed by Morgan Stanley. Anyway, Morgan Stanley, the city of Chicago, and the consulting firm William Blair hammered out the rest of the terms and then gave the city council 2 days to read through and approve the 150-page contract. When some city council members protested, they were reminded that they had already passed the city's 2009 budget that already included $150 million from the meter deal, and that any third-party audit of the deal or any other delay could put the city at risk.
This is a very difficult vote. I don't want it to happen. The budget is a difficult vote.
After only 24 hours of review, the city council approved the contract 40 votes to 5.
Ordinance is passed.
And so the deal went through. And when the dust had settled, one thing became abundantly clear. Chicago had beefed it. Oh God, did they beef it. They beefed it so bad. And of course they did. It's Morgan Stanley. You think you're gonna beat Morgan Stanley at money? Hey, here's a crazy tip. Anytime an investment banking company is super psyched about a 75-year deal they're about to do with you, don't take the deal, baby. Come on, you're not gonna beat them at money. In fact, the consulting company that was hammering out the deal on behalf of Chicago was also working with Morgan Stanley on other deals. And hot diggity dog did Chicago get taken for a ride. When Morgan Stanley came in, they quadrupled the meter prices, extended the amount of times meters would be active, and reduced the amount of time you could park to just 2 hours. That train's going to Harlem? That's gonna be a long ride! Ooh, ooh! And then there were the true-up payments that Chicago had to pay back to Morgan Stanley. Oh yeah, remember those details we were talking about earlier? Well, one of the most insidious parts of the meter deal was that Morgan Stanley was basically guaranteed revenue. See, Morgan Stanley had the power to jack up the hourly rates on the meters, but Chicago officials had been promised that they could make adjustments if their constituents got too angry. But Chicago would have to make up the difference in annual payments back to Morgan Stanley. Want to close off a road for construction?
The city has to reimburse the parking meter company for any revenue lost because of road construction that blocks parking at one of its meters.
Planning a parade that goes through downtown?
By contract, those parking meters have to keep running to make sure that this company is making money.
Want to remove a space closest to the crosswalk so cars can see pedestrians who are trying to cross the street?
Why are you doing this? Why are you even thinking this way?
For practically any changes to the meter status quo, Chicago had to pay. They had the option of adding new meters in comparable spots to offset the cost, but in a city that already has 36,000 meters, there simply aren't a lot of new comparable areas to put extra meters. Chicago also had to pay Morgan Stanley anytime more than 6% of people parked at the meters had disabled placards. See, in the state of Illinois, people can park for free with a disabled placard. Seems reasonable. But now that Morgan Stanley jacked up the meter rates and extended the hours of operation and paid parking, more and more people were either getting counterfeit placards from their friends who knew Photoshop or getting them legally through their doctor. In the first 5 years of operation, Morgan Stanley billed Chicago $75.4 million for their supposedly lost revenue due to disabled placards. Cool stuff. And between the true-up payments and the increased meter prices, Morgan Stanley made a killing. By 2019, just 10 years after they signed the deal, they had already made their $1 billion back plus an additional $500 million. As of now, Morgan Stanley is looking at 60 years of payments from the citizens of Chicago. I mean, that money could be going to city infrastructure, but instead it's going to what I can only assume is a very happy yacht salesman. And in case you were wondering, Chicago did not save their meter deal money to collect interest for a rainy day. City officials spent almost all of the rainy day fund by the year 2011. And to top it all off, 1 year after the ink was dry on the contract, the Chicago Inspector General released a report that concluded that the meter deal was worth at minimum $2 billion and probably something more like $3.53 billion. And if you're keeping score at home, that's between 2 and 3 times what Chicago actually got paid, and that was a conservative estimate. Morgan Stanley internally valued the deal at like $9.58 billion, which is 8 times more than Chicago got. Don't take the deal! They're bankers, okay? They make predatory music labels look like Doctors Without Borders. Don't take the deal! Don't take the deal! Okay, we could sit here and play Monday morning hot dog salesman on the Chicago meter deal all day, but the multi-billion-dollar mistake that Chicago made can be summed up in just 2 words: the discount rate. Shit, that is 3 words. Just discount rate. Discount rate. And I know what you're feeling. You're starting to tune me out. That is the correct reaction. I am not the man to tell you about discount rate. The man for that job is Matt Parker from Stand Up Maths. Thanks for standing right there.
My pleasure. I got us 2 hot dogs.
Oh, thank you.
Great for you, actually.
Oh.
And one is hot dog now.
Great.
And this one is hot dog later. So if you pay money now, you eat this hot dog now.
And I'm hungry now.
Yeah, you want this one.
Yeah, of course.
But if you have to pay money now, and you eat this hot dog later, you're not going to want to pay as much.
That's right.
You don't want hot dog later.
I pay you $100 for this hot dog now.
That feels inflated,
but
I'll
only
take it.
$50 for that hot
Okay,
dog.
now you're just making numbers up.
That's right.
Clearly Chicago wouldn't just do that. They would calculate the discount rate, which is the exact percentage that you would need to reduce the value of hot dog later to be comparable to hot dog now.
Okay.
And calculating that is super interesting, but traditionally I would use like a whiteboard and some spreadsheets. Really, I'll show you their working out.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, this is an episode of Climate Time, baby. We don't have that stuff here because we forgot to bring it.
Yeah.
But you can just turn hard in any direction and we'll edit it in and it'll look like we planned it.
I'm just somewhere else.
Anywhere else.
I can be at home.
Anywhere you want to be.
I'm doing it. Have the hot dog?
Sure.
Let's roll. Hey! Right. Okay, so the discount rate is the exact mathematical percentage that you'd have to increase the amount of money by so that money in a year is equivalent to money now. So if I had 2 $100 bills, that's a bit better. And I say you can have this one now, this one in a year, you want the one now. But what if I grab some quarters? Right, and I start adding money to this side. It's now gone up by 1%. It's $101. Is that equivalent $101 in a year to $100 right now? First of all, we have to factor in inflation because money in the future is just literally worth less. And the Chicago Inspector General in the report said that a 3% rate for inflation is reasonable. So $100 now is equivalent to $103 in a year's time, just because of inflation. Secondly, you got to factor in the cost of borrowing the money. So if the city of Chicago decided, after all, we do need the money now, and they hadn't taken the deal, they're going to have to borrow, and that costs money. Although less than it would for you or I, governments can borrow money very cheaply, and the Inspector General averaged the cost of borrowing for the city of Chicago for the 5 years prior to the deal and said that on average it will cost them 2.19% per year to borrow money. We multiply them together to get their combined impact and it equals 1.05257, which means we can switch that back to being a percentage, 5.26%. That is the discount rate as far as the city of Chicago is concerned to factor in inflation and the cost of borrowing. At this point, it's important to realize the higher this value ends up being, the bigger the discount rate, the smaller the value will be, so the smaller the overall price. And so actually, it's in the city of Chicago's interest to keep the discount rate as low as possible, and it's in the party buying their interest to make it as big as possible. And so they want to add on some factor to incorporate the risk they're taking on. That's actually an extra 1.5 8% risk to factor in that maybe they won't earn as much as it's predicted to be. And so that gives you, in this case, you just add them together and you end up with 7.06% total discount rate. Although the Inspector General then did round that to just be a nice, neat 7%. So how does this final value of 7% compare to what actually happened in the deal? Well, the Chicago Inspector General made a table. Big fan. Because you've got to factor in that the discount rate is guesswork and the predicted revenue is guesswork. So you want to look at a few different scenarios to see what some plausible future options are. And here they've got 5 different possible future revenues, the expected amount, and then they go 1 and 2 degrees of optimistic up from there, because you never know, might be incredible. They also go down 2 steps, pessimistic and very pessimistic. And then right in the middle, they've got the 7% discount rate. They also include 8 and 9, and those are higher discount rates, which means the overall price has gone down. And they include, just for completeness, 6 and 5. So we've now got 25 different possibilities. And the most likely one overall is right in the middle. And I guess that's the one that the city of Chicago, right in the corner. The only way you can justify the 1.16 billion price tag is if you use a discount rate of 9%, which is, I would say way too high. That seems to be what the report says. And you use the very pessimistic future modeling. In all other scenarios, that is desperately undervalued what the parking meters are actually worth. And so we can say pretty conclusively have undervalued what their 75-year contract is worth. And why 75 years? Would a shorter term have been better value for the city of Chicago? Well, check out this plot from the report. So nice. This is showing that the greater your distance into the future, the more worthless the money is now. Money 75 years from now is practically worthless now. So they show if you did half the term, 37 years, you still could have got 1.08 billion for the half-length contract. That's 93% of the value. If they just needed $1 billion, why do 75 years when 37 years is more than enough? There you have it. So that is how you can calculate a discount rate to calculate how much money you should demand now in lieu of getting money later. So I'm gonna head back over to Chicago. I guess I've got to, I don't fully understand how this works, but I suspect I've got to be holding the fish and chips again, right? Then if I lose some, is that going to make a difference? Hang on, let me get these. Wait. Okay, I'm ready. Here we go.
Done. Wow, that was great. I assume. Obviously, we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it's Future Matt's problem.
Yeah, but that guy,
hey, he's all over it.
He's doing a great job. Well, thank you so much. You're officially released.
I'm allowed to go?
Yeah.
Excellent.
You do have to slam these 2 dogs, though. Or you can give it to that seagull. Thanks, Matt. But so what, right? Why should we care about this? My dad grew up in Chicago and he's got a phrase, tough beans, hard cheese, better luck next time. I don't love that phrase, but it kind of makes sense. Why should we give a single honk about what Chicago did? It's because every city in America has the potential to make their own version of the shitty meter deal, and there are some really important things we can learn to steer ourselves away from this kind of flaming car wreck of a contract in the future. For starters, we have been boning ourselves for years when it comes to parking. If you watched my last video about parking, first of all, thank you so much. Oh my God, thanks for watching. But second of all, you'll know that parking is effectively an enormous subsidy to car owners. Basically, by the 1940s and 50s, America's obsession with cars became a sort of catastrophic horniness that put millions upon millions of new cars onto the streets. Those cars understandably clogged the ever-living shit out of the roads. City planners decided that a lack of parking was behind all this new traffic, so they promptly passed a bunch of laws called minimum parking requirements, which forced developers to overbuild parking spaces to fit all the millions of cars we were cranking out. The cost to build and maintain all that free parking is just added to housing or groceries or tuition or etc., which means people without cars are subsidizing all that parking for people with cars. In a city, this often takes the form of non-car owners paying through the nose in taxes for parking spaces that they will never use. spaces. Those spaces are often used by drivers who avoid the city's taxes by living in the suburbs, but drive into town to check out that cool new mural everyone is Instagramming about. You see, for 70 years we built our cities and towns to cater to the every whim of the automobile, and 7 decades of car-centric urban planning have turned basically every American city into this. Now, normally parking meters are a much better deal for a city's inhabitants than free parking, which makes perfect sense. Car owners want to store their personal property on public land. Parking meters are a great way for a city's taxpayers to rent their land out by the hour to car owners who want to use it. And in an ideal world, that money then gets used for things like public transportation or bike infrastructure or something that the people of the city can use. In the case of the Chicago meters, every time someone rents that prime city real estate, they give their money to a fucking bank. And yes, Morgan Stanley and Company quadrupled the rates on meters over the first few years of managing them.
Parking meter rates have gone up again, making downtown rates the highest in the country.
Downtown parking meter rates went up, and by the end of the month, they'll be up all across the city.
$6.50 per hour.
But I'm not even really mad about that part. I mean, this is 100 square feet of prime Chicago real estate per parking spot. You shouldn't really be able to rent it for a couple of bucks an hour. That is a deeply subsidized price for the land. We all just accept it because that's the way it's always been. And as the years since the 2008 meter deal have slowly ticked by, people all across America are waking up to the fact that car-centric urban planning is just not that fun to, exist in. Over 80% of the US population lives in urban areas, and since transportation is one of the largest sources of emissions, making our cities more pedestrian-friendly is both better for people and one of the best ways to combat climate change. Clawing back cities from cars and deworming America's collective car brain is a monumental task for any city. But in Chicago's case, they also have to contend with Morgan Stanley forcing the city to maintain their car-centric infrastructure because they have a contract that says they are guaranteed to make money off of it. In 2020, when the COVID pandemic forced everybody outside, cities let restaurants and businesses spill out into the streets, and an amazing thing happened. People liked it. Open streets programs took off across the nation, and their overwhelming popularity led many mayors to make the changes permanent. It was one of the most incredible moments in urban design history, and Chicago was no exception. They had their open streets in 2020, the public obviously loved them, but unlike other cities, Chicago would have to pay through the nose to make them permanent, because they didn't functionally own their own streets. In 2020 alone, Chicago had to pay $6.25 million in true-up payments to Morgan Stanley for their street closures. During the pandemic, which sounds like something you would write in a movie about evil bankers, and then people would see it and be like, come on, no one would actually charge to let small business owners sell food to desperate people outside. But in fact, dear readers, they did. So while most cities are free to adjust their traffic patterns and parking infrastructure as they wish, Chicago is hit with a bill anytime they make even a minor change. And yes, this inability to adapt to the future has some very negative climate implications. For one, Chicago is limited in its ability to improve its bus lines, because meters require that prime curbside real estate be devoted to parked cars. The Chicago Transit Authority planned out a network of 20 bus rapid transit lines that would reduce traffic by making what was once a mandatory car trip into a fast and easy bus ride. While implementing the first bus rapid transit line, however, they discovered they didn't have enough spaces to replace meters that would need to be taken out of service to run the other bus lines, and the meter deal effectively blocked Chicago from completing their public transportation project. It's also creating problems for vehicle electrification. The Inflation Reduction Act provides funds for municipalities to add electric vehicle chargers, but adding chargers means removing a metered spot, which is going to cause whatever the opposite of a solution is when America's push to electrify all of our vehicles bumps up against Morgan Stanley's stranglehold on the parking spaces and their 2-hour maximum parking limit. The Chicago Department of Transportation is also trying to limit street parking during rush hour as a way to minimize congestion during high traffic times. But the true-up costs for the lost meter time is complicating what should be a straightforward traffic policy. And what about all those pedestrian parks Chicago had planned? What about the plan to remove parking spaces to install a protected bike lane? Or how about that plan to plant and maintain trees that provide a cooling effect in the event that there's some kind of, I don't know, warming that affects the globe? Why do you think Chicago was unable to implement any of these plans? Alright, so the TLDR here is that locking a city into a predatory contract that hamstrings its ability to improve the lives of its citizens so a private company can make money is so super uncool, you guys. Now, I'm not saying that all public-private partnerships are bad, but when a city makes a deal of this kind, it should probably be in service of the city's residents, be open and honest about the terms of the contract, and have an exit strategy in case your impressionable young mayor gets hornswoggled harder than a naive country western musician in the 1930s. And just to throw it out there, you should probably have some kind of third party take a peek at your term sheet before entering into a 75-year commitment that gives away control of an incredibly important city asset. And to Chicago's credit, they're fucking working on it.
They keep sending bills assuming that I'm going to do the same old and pay them, and I'm not. I'm not going to pay them until I get a complete audit of the books.
So far, they've been unable to nullify the deal, but in 2013, under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, they were able to renegotiate the true-up payments to allow the city to calculate the damages instead of letting Morgan Stanley tell them how much they owed. Amazingly, this saved Chicago millions of dollars every year. And despite being completely ripped off by the meter deal, Chicago has worked very hard to scale up their human-centric city planning. The bottom line here is that we seem to have exited the f***around times and have arrived squarely in the find-out era. We are finding out that cities need to be able to make important climate decisions that benefit their citizens without having to negotiate with a for-profit business. We're finding out how effective urban living can be when oriented around people, and how hilariously inefficient it is when it caters to cars and bankers. And if you'd like to find out what in the Sam Hill you personally can do to help mitigate some of the damage that's on the way, look no further than your local city council. You see, the meter deal had to be voted on by elected officials, and elected officials have to be elected and official, but elected is the sort of critical word here. And voting for politicians who are fully committed to human-centric infrastructure is a great first step. You can also just go to city council meetings and follow up in person. You can contact your local representatives and let them know that you're in favor of prioritizing open streets and public transportation. And if you're into parking reform, you can watch our other video about parking, which I'm sure isn't, oh my God, 31 minutes! Wow, okay, well maybe just skip to this part in the timeline, and then you can follow the steps detailed in the playbook that we created with our friends over at Climate Change Makers. Link in the bio. And if you've already seen both videos, you hear that sound? That means you win. You've officially learned more than you ever wanted to about parking, and you have only yourself to blame. And if you're still not ready to stop learning today, then I humbly invite you to head on over to Nebula, where you can uncork a limitless wealth of content, including a deep dive by City Beautiful, all about how the boulevards of Paris are largely responsible for that Parisian je ne sais quoi that no one seems to be able to describe or express. It's a Nebula original that really helps give you a sense of what a city could look like if it wasn't quite so focused on making sure cars have a nice, comfy place to hang out 24/7. You can also catch early, ad-free episodes of Climate Town on Nebula. That's right, if you're watching this video on Nebula, you're not seeing this ad, and you are 30 seconds ahead of where you are right now. Imagine the goofy sliding doors kind of moment you could be having. Maybe you fall in love with a rich duke? Oh, kooky. Anyway, Nebula is a very cool ad-free streaming service with tons of exclusive and high-quality content that you can get access to right now for just $2.50 a month when you use the 40% off discount code link in the description. Now that's a deal. And it also has the added benefit of supporting Climate Town directly. And I know this is a bit of a conflict of interest, but I just think that would be a really cool thing for somebody to do. And that's the end of the episode. You made it to the end. First of all, The biggest thank you to Henry Grabar and Donald Shoup for their books Paved Paradise and The High Cost of Free Parking. They were incredibly important to making this video and the other parking video we made. Buy their books, you will not be disappointed. Also, a million thank yous to Matt, Nicole, and Alex from the YouTube channel Stand Up Maths. They couldn't be here today because they live several time zones in the future. Think about the sliding doors moments there. But we actually did a two-parter. This is part one of a two-parter, and the second part is over on the Stand Up Maths channel. And it's got all the math from the parking meter deal and even some of the maths, whatever that is. You can check it out, link in the description. And finally, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, feel free to like and subscribe or leave me a little comment. You know I'll read it. But if you really like the channel, you can subscribe to our Patreon page, where for like $5 a month, you get access to deleted scenes, behind the scenes content, just the stuff that wasn't good enough to be free. Oh yeah, now we're talking. You want some more free shit? I have an embarrassing amount of free shit. It almost implies a lack of confidence in my own product. We have a podcast called The Climate Denier's Playbook that features me and my friend Nicole Conlan, who's a writer over at The Daily Show. We break down climate myths, their origin stories, who benefits from them, and more importantly, why they're wrong. We also have a newsletter that we do every time we release an episode that's got all the extra little tidbits that didn't quite cram into this episode. We also have a Discord server where you can go and talk to other climate heads. We even added a Climate Town Knowledge Hub where you can find more climate-related resources and info than doctors recommend. And if none of that sounds interesting to you, just go outside and take a big breath of fresh air. Because last time I checked in America, that's still free. Until Starbucks presents Teslazon gets their greasy mitts on it. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.
I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it at any time.
Right, that's all.